Hello, bonjour, hola. So this is Mr. McCarthy. This is video number 3. Apologize ahead of time. This one is a little bit longer than the other ones and is the longest video for this unit. Sorry, just the way the cookie crumbles. So today we're going to talk about corporation. So when we talk about corporation, a company or a group of people authorized to act as a single entity. Legally, they are a person and recognized as such in law. A little bit more than kind of what we're going to get into. The U.S. Supreme Court defines a corporation, so we're talking about as an artificial being, invisible, intangible, and existent only in contemplation of the law. So this is probably a little bit more than what we're talking about, but some information that's just good to know. As a business, a corporation functions independently of its owners, but is treated as a person with legal rights, duties, and powers. So corporations do have rights, and it's not individual people. It's just the one corporation. So it's not independent. You can't break it out. Because the corporation is considered separate from its owners, the owners are not liable for the company's actions, and their personal property cannot be taken to pay outstanding debt. So this is probably the biggest aspect that's great about a corporation is your personal property, stuff, cannot be taken to pay outstanding debts. So they can't come after your stuff. All right. And as an owner, and we'll talk about how you become an owner, I'm not liable for the company's actions. So if they do something wrong, it's not my fault. Whereas with our partnerships and everything else, so proprietorship, yeah, you are. So owners are only liable for the amount they invest in the company. Again, we'll talk about how you become an owner with shares and stock. We'll come back to that one here in a second. And the corporation business structure is the most complex to legally establish and requires the expertise of an attorney. So this one is actually pretty hard to start a corporation. You can't just go out there and start one with your buddy, whereas you could go out and start a partnership with your buddy. All right, to be an owner of a corporation, a person purchases shares of stock and becomes a stockholder or a shareholder. So the owners of a corporation are these shareholders. Right? You definitely need to know that. The more shares of stock a person owns, the more control the person has over the business. So one of the ones that we talk about, if you know the name Jeff Bezos or you know Bill Gates, Bezos owns Amazon, Bill Gates owns Microsoft. They own it because they have the most amount of stock. We talked about the 51 and 49%. When it comes to stock, you could have an infinite number of stockholders, but if you own the most stock, you are now the owner because you own the most. So, and again, the more you control, the more impact you have. Corporations are typically, this says are, so typically governed by a board of directors. So that's who's going to make the decisions for which way the corporation is going to go. It is very rarely the owner making those decisions. Usually they've got to go through the board of directors to get things done. And on some occasions, you can see where the owner can do what he wants to do. Again, not as common as the board of directors route. Right? So when we talk about the board of directors, the board consists of people, and sometimes there could be some stockholders in there. Again, we talk about some of our big name stockholders that we know and owners who make decisions about the activities of the business. The company's officers, you may have heard of president, vice president, the chief financial officer, CFO, CEO, any of those big abbreviations and titles, they execute these decisions, and they're running the day-to-day operations of the business and what's going on. Sorry, I forgot to turn my notifications off. Another thing that we look at corporations, they can either be private or closed, or they could be open. All right, so a private or closed corporation does not offer shares for sale to the general public, meaning that only just a few shareholders, it's private. As it says, in many cases, the shareholders also operate and manage the business. All right, so not going to be selling shares off to people, very small, very private. Can't just buy into the company. Not like a Nike where you can just buy stock and become an owner. Private corporation is usually not required to make its financial activities public, which is kind of the benefit of that. But for tax reasons, it must prepare reports for the state in which it operates. All right, corporations, there's a lot of documentation that goes into that, and that's where having an attorney is really helpful. We're not going to get into the depths of what you have to turn in and why and all that kind of stuff. So a private corporation is taxed by the government in two ways. First, it's taxed on the profits made by the company. So if the company makes money, they have to pay because they made profit. You have to pay taxes on that. And second, the shareholders are taxed on the dividends they earn on their investment. So as a shareholder, if we get money back, that's called the dividend. Right? The more share you have, the more dividends you're going to get. Usually the way it works, we have 10,000 shares and we made $10,000. Okay, every share gets $1. If I own 2 shares, then I get $2. 1 share, $1. Okay, so your dividend is paid out per share. So the more shares you own, the more dividends you're going to get, or the higher amount of dividends. So this is how we talk about dual or double taxation. Right? So we will need to know about dual taxation or double taxation when it comes time for our test. Now, and when we talk about a not private or a public corporation, we'll talk about a couple different ones. Right? First one, we're going to talk about a C, letter C, not the water, letter. A C corporation, also known as a public corporation, can sell millions of shares of stock to the general public. So that's what most of our companies are. Because anyone can purchase stock, there may be unlimited stockholders in just one company. You could have an infinite amount of people that own stock. C corporations are subject to more government regulations and taxation than other forms of business ownership. Okay, so more taxing goes into the C corporation. In addition, federal law mandates that public corporations provide financial information to the public and prospective investors. So this information is all out there, how much they made, how much they spent, all of those financial documents. We'll touch base on those more than when we talk about our finance and accounting units. Right? The information that they give out, this information is outlined in a formal document called an annual report. So you know where the company is at every year. And like private corporations, public corporations are subject to dual taxation. So going to get taxed on the money they're making, the profit, and then the shareholder is going to get taxed when they get their money. The other one we talk about is going to be an S corporation. So that's a private corporation with special benefits designed to help small businesses. By taxing the corporation as if it were a partnership, the S corporation avoids dual taxation because they're set up like a partnership. This saves the owners a lot of money in taxes, and it really can. To qualify as an S corporation, the company must have 100 or fewer shareholders and adhere to a number of other government policies. So again, you can't just say, oh, well, I want to be an S, or I want to be a C, or I want to be a corporation. You have to file paperwork. You have to get approval from the government. We talked about getting licensed to be able to run your business. This is where you're going to see a lot of those come into place. Another one that we have that we'll see a lot of is going to be our nonprofit. A nonprofit corporation, right, operates to accomplish a specific mission rather than to make a profit. Right? So they're not out here to make money. Right? They're trying to help people or help an organization or help a mission. Okay? Not here for the purpose of making money. Generally, the purpose of the organization is to help society, and income is used to fund programs and cover operational expenses. So whatever money we make, our profit is then put back into the company. We're going to use it to make our company better. We're going to add more programs, but the money stays in the company. This is the big premise that I'd like you to hold on to. Institutions that are charitable, educational, religious, or scientific in nature are usually established as nonprofit corporations. Usually your school districts are nonprofit. They're not set up to make money. Churches are traditionally set up as nonprofit. Now, there are churches that are set up for a profit, so be careful. There are schools that are set up for a profit. Right? Usually these are private institutions. Their purpose is to make money and to give you an education. Because nonprofit organizations like the Red Cross are established to benefit society, not generally taxed by the federal government, that is the biggest reason that I personally think why people go for a nonprofit, is trying to avoid taxes from the government, because we want to keep as much money as we can. Right? Many nonprofits rely on donations and grants for funding, so it might not be selling things, they're just taking in money to try and make society better. All right, so a lot of donations and a lot of grants for how they're going to get their money. So we talk about a corporation, right? When we asked these questions before, we talked about everything else. So for a corporation, who's going to make the decisions? Well, we talked about the board of directors. Those are the ones that are going to handle the day-to-day things for what goes on. So they're making the decisions. How quickly can those decisions be enacted? Well, really, it depends on how big your company is and how much of a decision you're trying to make. If the board of directors says, hey, we're going to sell at Nike, hey, we're going to sell a new shoe, or let's get into a new venture, there's research, there's design, that can take a while. So it really depends on what that decision is that you're trying to put in, especially with a corporation, because you've got more hoops and more people that you have to go through. Who's responsible for the company and the direction it goes? That's going to come down to the board of directors. Right? They're going to decide what that company is going to do and how it's going to go. Again, with a corporation, the owners are the shareholder. You might get a vote, but not as much as that board is going to get. Who assumes the risk and how much of the risk do they assume? The shareholders are going to be the risk, and only as much as they're into it. Right? They can come after the corporation and take the corporation's money, but they can't personally come after you. Who gets the profit and how much of the profit do they get? In a corporation, the profit goes to the shareholders. How much do they get? Well, that depends on a lot of things. Depends on how much profit there is and how many shareholders there are. Right? You're going to divide the profit by the amount of shareholders so that every share gets the same amount of profit. So more shares, more profit. And who's liable for any claims against the company? Well, the company is, right? Because we can't hide. I don't want to say hide, that's not the right word, but we are behind the corporation, right? They can't come get me as the owner because I'm a shareholder. If someone sues Nike, they sue Nike. They don't sue me because I own a share in Nike and I'm an owner. And to what extent are they liable? Only for what I'm in. I bought my share of Nike for, we'll just say $20. And no, it is not $20, but I'm only liable for that money that I spent on that share. Who covers the expenses? Well, the corporation has to cover their expenses for operating. All right. And again, the law cannot come after us beyond what we're in for. Examples of a corporation, we talked about Amazon as a corporation, Microsoft as a corporation, talked about Nike earlier. Those are all corporations. All right. And we've talked about these before. When we're operating a business, there's a lot of responsibilities, things that need to be taken care of. When we get into a corporation, we're usually so large that we have a management department. We have a finance department. We have a human resources department. And we have people that's their job. They handle human resources. That's all they worry about. That's all they do. Right? That's the department. Now, they're going to break it down. They're going to have different things inside the human resources. Maybe your insurance, maybe your hiring. Everybody's going to have a little bit different, but we're all kind of in that same group. Now, typically what you're going to see is each one of these is going to have a person that's at the head of it. So the top person in human resources, the top person for management, the top person for finance. For finance, you hear the chief financial officer, the CFO. They have a lot of fancy abbreviations. Every company might have a different name. A lot of them use the same ones, but these are things that have to be taken care of when we're running our business. And with a corporation, typically you're going to see these spread out amongst the groups.